Alright, it's time to talk about a game that I've honestly been looking forward to for quite a while. Indivisible by Lab Zero Games, the creators of Skullgirls. This is the only game that I have ever backed on any crowdfunding platform, and I think that alone says something. I'm typically very skeptical about that sort of thing. I have seen a lot of really disastrous Kickstarters over the years. Even games that get completely funded often end up misfiring and pissing off their audiences, sometimes before they even come out. But this game was different pretty much almost from the start, because when Indivisible was having its Indiegogo campaign, they actually had a playable prototype of the game from day one. And it felt pretty good. It felt almost complete in a way, at least as far as the quality of it. There was no gray boxing environments. All of the sprite work seemed like it was finished. And the confidence that prototype had is what inspired me to give them money, because I felt like they had something that worked and they were already presenting it to us. That's something that other companies haven't necessarily done, and I was honestly a little bummed that the campaign ended up being pretty sluggish. It took them a long time to raise the $1.5 million that they were asking for, and it was only because Indiegogo allows you to extend deadlines if you're making a certain amount of progress that they got funded at all. So that kind of made me feel a little sad, because I felt like this was a campaign that was being really transparent right out the gate, and they really proved that they could get something like this done, notwithstanding all of the work they did on Skullgirls. And after giving them some of my money, I kind of forgot about the project. It ended up getting delayed pretty significantly, but I think that they tried to do a good job of keeping people informed, and there was not one but two prototype builds that you could play after that, and those helped kind of renew my interest in it over the years. That said, we're here now, the game is out, and I wanted to do a video on it just to kind of help raise awareness, but also give my honest thoughts on it, because I funded it a while ago. I did get a copy because of that funding, but I'm here to judge the game accurately and fairly. Obviously, I'm not sponsored by Lab Zero. So Indivisible is kind of a combination of a platformer like Super Metroid and lots of indie games, but it also has some RPG and fighting game elements. As far as RPG elements, I would say it's more of the action RPG concept. It's similar to Valkyrie Profile, if you've ever played that, in that the entire party kind of goes at once. And the manner in which they attack, though, is more like a fighting game, where you have some different directional inputs that you can do. You can do combos, you can use your different party members together to make those combos even longer. You have a meter. These are very clearly aspects from a fighting game, and I think it's kind of a clever way of integrating the work they did on Skullgirls into a project that feels very different. It does help the game have a unique angle to it, because there are a lot of indie exploration-based platformers like this, and I don't think Indivisible strays super hard from that trend, but I think that it is sold mostly not only through the combat being very different, but also from the art style, because that's really what endeared me to the game. I think that the people at Lab Zero have really talented artists, and I think they've come through with a really unique and interesting style in the games that they've worked on. I was really happy to see that here. There's some really beautiful sprite art. I think the character designs are all very inspired by this blend of cartoony ridiculousness and somewhat real-world cultures, and I thought that was really clever, and I was very glad to see how far they went with it in this game. I think that it really elevates a lot of the characters, because there is a lot in this. As far as party members, there are so many combinations that you could choose from, some of which are clearly a lot more useful than others. I shouldn't really say that, because I don't think that any of them are necessarily bad, but some will take more time to kind of figure out than others. There are definitely some that are simpler that I gravitated towards, and I suppose that is a criticism to a degree. So I know that the game is sort of marketed as an RPG, but I do want to stress that it does fall more into the Metroidvania territory. It does have a lot of emphasis on story, and I thought the story was fine for what they were trying to do. It's not exactly rocket science, but it has its clever moments. I think that the first act moves a little too quickly, honestly, as far as like character development and some of those aspects, but it kind of evens out later in the game. I do think that the last fourth or so of the game probably could have been beefed up a bit, because that's when you have to do all sorts of backtracking, and I think that people generally just don't like backtracking in these kinds of games. Even a game like this, where a lot of effort was put into making the world feel connected, you're constantly finding new ways to move through it, you can get around a lot faster as you progress through the game, which I do appreciate, but I think that it's still more than a lot of people are going to want to deal with. Similarly to how I think that the art really separates the game from most other indie games, I kind of feel the same way about the music. They got the composer who's worked on Secret of Mana, and I think he did good work here, and it kind of feels distinct from a lot of other games of this type. Similarly, you have a lot of voice acting in this game, most of which is pretty good, especially given that some of the actors in it I'm not really familiar with. I don't think they've done a lot of voice work or video game work, and they actually give pretty good performances. Of course, you have other characters who are voiced by much more recognizable people, so that's always fun. Overall, I think it's a nice little game, and I definitely feel satisfied with it. The price of $40 I'm a little iffy on, but this game, it doesn't feel short at all. It feels about the right length, to be quite honest. There are definitely a few rough spots here or there. I kind of get the sense that even though this game has been delayed many times, they might have needed a little more time to do some polishing up, because there are a few aspects that feel a little janky. I did have one soft lock as well, but to be honest, that wasn't really a huge deal, because I think you can reload up to like 200 of your previous saves, so you can't actually really get glitched out as far as I can tell. Still, a little bit of polishing would have been nice. There are a few aspects that feel off. It's got a really interesting art style. I think that is backed up by some pretty solid Metroidvania gameplay, creative fighting system that doesn't really get repetitive, and there's so many options as far as characters that you can really mix it up and have fun experimenting. I think that if you're looking for that kind of gameplay, you're going to want to check this out at some point. But that's my recommendation. Let's take a look at this post from the game's director, Mike Z. Here he basically outlines lots of things that aren't in the game, and I actually wasn't aware that some of these things were not in the game until he was posting about it. And that really just kind of solidified the concern that I had that this game wasn't quite done because of some of the jank to it, and that is the tough spot, because I have no doubt that they're going to continue supporting this game, because that's what they did with Skullgirls. They're going to continue to add to it. But I think it kind of soured things for me a little, knowing that if I had waited a bit to play it, I might have gotten a package that was a bit better, or maybe even significantly better. So, knowing that there are changes on the way, hopefully soon, I'm going to list off several of them now, because I'd like to basically give feedback. I supported this thing from the beginning, and here's what I have to say as far as what I think needs to be fixed. This is the biggest thing. The game balance, it totally falls apart about 2/3 of the way through. Enemies in general just start to get really weak, and I thought that I was over-leveled or something, but you can't really grind in this game, so I don't think that was the case. Across the board, the enemies in this game probably could be made more aggressive than they are, especially because later in the game, it's nothing. They just don't have the HP to be able to deal with you. Spending currency on defense upgrades feels like a waste. Using characters who can heal you feels like a waste. And I know this is something that they've addressed and they're going to fix, but I don't really understand how it ended up this way. Even the final boss feels very, very weak. I do like the final form of it. It is a little gimmicky, but because of that gimmick, it actually is challenging, but that first form, it's just as weak as a lot of the other stuff that you've been fighting up to that point. And I know that it's something that they really need to address. The second biggest thing, we need a move list for every character, because it is very unclear what certain attacks or super moves do. Yes, they do describe what some of these attacks do, but it's very selective. You might only know what one move does, or up to 3 moves, depending on the character. And I think you need to be able to see the whole thing. This especially applies for Ajna, the main character, because I never really understood how her regular moves worked, because they change over the course of the game. Some characters didn't even have super moves, which I didn't realize until I was frantically trying to do them in a fight. It has been said that there are hint screens that give some additional tips The only time I saw these hint screens was for like a flickering frame sometimes when I would die. They don't function properly because the game doesn't really load all that long. So get that information out of the hint screens and put it in the menu somewhere. I sort of mentioned this earlier, but the few characters that can dish out a lot of damage or build up meter very quickly, those kind of trump most other characters. I think that this could definitely be fixed by changing these characters into glass cannon types, where they don't have a lot of health. But since enemies aren't really that aggressive, that kind of factors into the problem as well. So when the game came out, I got an email from Lab Zero that said that 2 of the party members were not going to be in the game at launch. They were going to be patched in later. That was kind of my first clue that something might have been up here. But there's this third character who is mentioned on the websites, and she's in the credits of the game, and they didn't mention her in that email, so what the hell happened to this character? I have no idea. Can someone tell me? I haven't seen an official statement anywhere. Also, am I insane? What is this area on the map? You never go there. What is it? It just feels weirdly out of place. Can someone tweet me? What is this? Oh, and those character quests that you can do, those kind of need to be reworked in my opinion. They come very late in the game and they never really clearly explain that. The waypoints for some of these quests don't always work properly, and I think that most importantly, the game needs to clearly explain what buffs the character has received once you've completed the quest. Also, this is more of a subjective one because you can get around the world fairly fast if you know where you're going. But I wouldn't mind if it was possible to fast travel to either the area's chakra gate or a bout-sized ship at some point, because that would really just help to save some time. Also, I just don't like these enemies that get healed by magical attacks. It's really obnoxious. It wouldn't be an issue if you could switch your party during a fight or run away from battles, but you can't. So having a party member who's kind of useless against some enemies, it just feels dumb. There's also no real way to know what characters attack with magic until you realize this. So yeah, that's just kind of my short list of things that I think could probably be fixed in a patch. Lab Zero has definitely made it clear that they're gonna address a lot of this. I've seen them talk about it. Mike Z has posted about that stuff. But there's definitely a part of me that wonders if they have loftier ambitions for this. I mean, Skullgirls went from what it was at launch to what the second Encore version is. I mean, that's a huge difference. And I almost wonder if they want to do something like that with this game. They could just continue to add and refine aspects of the combat, add lots of characters. That would be okay. But maybe they're going to try to do something more ambitious. Maybe they're going to try to add new levels into the game, do something kind of like Guacamelee did. I'm not really sure, but there's definitely a part of me that feels like, even though I had my fun with this, if I had waited, I might have gotten something a bit more special. And I certainly would like to play the game again at some point, but I'm having trouble figuring out when that time would be. So my advice is that if you don't mind a little bit of jank, you can try the game now. But I think that if you keep your ear to the ground, and if these patches come out at a regular interval, you might have a better experience. My hope is that a lot of this stuff will be resolved by the time the game is ported to Switch, but there is no timetable on that port, so who knows when it's coming out. Or maybe they're just trying to release it as soon as possible and they're not really trying to fix up the game before then. I just don't know. I kind of feel a little bad because I've played full-price games that are much buggier than this, so they don't necessarily get fixed ever. So we should be grateful that it seems like Lab Zero wants to do something about this game. Some of these issues, of course, they do factor into my overall opinion, but I really do hope that they can get ironed out. This is still a pretty good game as it is. I would say just go with your gut on it. That's kind of what I had to do back when this whole thing was being crowdfunded, you know? So I suppose that's all I have to say about Indivisible. Please let me know what you think of the game if you have played it in its current incarnation. And, you know, maybe someday, once it's received a sizable update of sorts, that's something really new and special, I might revisit and let you know if I think it's changed the whole game. But for now, we're going to leave it as it is. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.